You think you can just toss me aside like an old rag, don't you? I'm Becky Smith, 61 years old, and just got fired from Everline Urban Design after 7 years of dedication. But don't be fooled. What they did to me will come back to haunt them. I might have been their past, but now, I'm about to become their worst nightmare. I sat in the corner office, the smell of leather and polished wood mixing with the faint hum of the city outside. The morning sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across Trent's desk. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping lightly on the armrest, his eyes on the phone in his hand. "Becky," he said, his voice smooth but dismissive, like he was announcing some trivial detail. "We're implementing budget cuts, and your position has been eliminated." I stared at him, the words sinking in slowly, as if they were too heavy for my mind to process all at once. It felt surreal, like I was caught in a dream where everything was moving too fast but I couldn't move at all. I had just handed him the certificate of completion for Jenna's training program. I had poured my heart into making sure she understood every little detail of the complex, often thankless work I had done for years. And this was my reward? A swift dismissal, as though everything I had given to this company, to this job, was worth nothing. The weight of his words settled like a stone in my chest. I could feel my throat tightening, but I forced myself to speak. "I see." My voice sounded steady, but inside, I was a storm of emotions. "You've done a good job training Jenna, and she's ready to take over your responsibilities," he continued, not looking up from his phone. "It's a strategic restructuring." Jenna, the same intern I had spent months training, the 24-year-old with no real experience, but thousands of followers on social media. I had trained her, mentored her, and now she would be stepping into my role. The thought burned, but there was no use arguing. I had seen this coming in the way Trent had looked at her, the lunches they shared, the private meetings where she had positioned herself as the future while I was the outdated past. "So, there won't be any transition period?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, even though I could feel the anger bubbling under the surface. Trent finally looked up at me, his eyes cold. "No need, she's up to speed." I wanted to say something, to tell him how much he had underestimated me, how much he had thrown away. But there was no point. He had made his decision, and it was final. "Human resources will help you clear out your desk. Your final paycheck and severance are ready. Today will be your last day," he said, standing up as though the conversation was over. I stood, the weight of the moment almost too much to bear. "Thank you for the opportunity," I said, my words sounding hollow, even to my own ears. I turned and walked out of his office, my steps echoing in the cold, sterile hallway. As I passed by the reception desk, I saw Jenna standing there, a forced look of concern on her face. I couldn't help but wonder if she had known this was coming. Had she been part of it all along? Had she orchestrated it? I pushed the thought aside as I made my way to my desk. My mind raced, but I kept my composure. This wasn't the time to lose control. I had always been the calm, collected one, the professional who never let emotions interfere with work. But this was different. I grabbed a box, placing the few personal items I had on my desk into it. My coffee mug, a small picture frame, my plants, which I had nurtured for years. I felt my breath catch in my throat, a sudden wave of emotion threatening to overwhelm me. I had given everything to this company. And for what? A severance check and a security escort out the door? I looked at the clock on the wall. It was only 9:30 a.m., a full day of work ahead, but for me, it was already over. I stepped into the parking garage, the weight of the box in my arms barely registering. The world outside felt blurry, distant, as if I were floating through a dream. I needed to think. I needed to breathe. As I approached my car, I pulled out my phone. My daughter, Catherine, had been texting me non-stop since the news had broken. She had always been my rock, the one who could see through my calm facade. "Mom, aren't you at work?" she had texted earlier. I dialed her number, and her voice came through immediately full of concern. "Mom, what happened? Why aren't you at work?" she asked, confusion lacing her tone. I paused, taking a deep breath, and then I spoke, my voice shaking just a little. "I was fired today." There was a long pause on the other end, and then Catherine's voice came through, shocked, angry. "What? Why? That's not possible. They can't do that." I explained as best as I could. The firing. the severance, Jenna taking my place. It's all part of some strategic restructuring. The words felt foreign, like I wasn't even saying them. Mom, that's age discrimination, Catherine said, her voice rising with indignation. You can sue them. I shook my head, though she couldn't see me. Maybe, but that's not what I'm thinking about right now. What do you mean? You need to fight back, Mom, she exclaimed. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to find the right words. I just need to think about what comes next. I ended the call, leaning against my car, the cool metal pressing against my back. What had come next? How could I let this happen? How could I let them just walk away from everything I had done? I had been loyal. I had worked hard. But loyalty meant nothing in this world. The harsh truth settled in. They didn't need me anymore. And yet, I would make them regret it. I slid into the driver's seat, the box of my personal belongings sitting beside me, heavy with the weight of everything I had just lost. The leather of the steering wheel was cold beneath my fingers, and the hum of the engine as it started up was oddly soothing, like a small comfort in a world that had just shifted beneath my feet. I needed to think. I needed some space. The bright spring sunlight outside felt almost blinding, a sharp contrast to the gray cloud that had settled over my mind. What had just happened? How could everything change so suddenly, so decisively? The company I had given 7 years to, the people I had worked with day in and day out, now wanted nothing to do with me. My phone buzzed in my hand, and I glanced at the screen. It was Catherine again. I'd been avoiding her texts, not wanting to burden her with the weight of my frustration, but it seemed she wasn't going to let me off the hook that easily. I hit the call button, and her voice was quick to answer, the worry in her tone unmistakable. Mom, what are you going to do? I'm not sure yet, I said, my voice still wavering just a bit. I hated the way it sounded. I wasn't used to being unsure. I had always been the one with the plan, the one who had it together, who knew exactly what came next. But right now, I felt lost. Well, you can't just let them get away with it, she pressed, her words coming fast. You need to fight back. Sue them for discrimination. This is ageism, Mom. You've been there for how long? 7 years, and they just toss you out like you're nothing. I know, I said, trying to steady my breathing. I know. But somehow, I didn't feel the fire in my gut that I thought I would. I had always prided myself on being calm, rational. I didn't act on impulse, never let emotion cloud my judgment. But now, all I could feel was a strange, simmering sense of anger, a kind of quiet fury that wasn't screaming at me for justice, but whispering about something far more satisfying. I took a deep breath and glanced out the window. The city was the same. The roads, the trees, everything looked unchanged, yet everything felt so different. Was I really just another casualty of the system? Another number on a spreadsheet marked budget cuts? I pulled into the parking lot of my favorite coffee shop. I didn't need caffeine, but the familiar scent of roasted beans and the sound of gentle conversation would calm me for a while. As I entered, the barista gave me a nod of recognition, but I didn't acknowledge her. My mind was somewhere else, focusing on the decision I needed to make. I ordered a small black coffee as I always did and took a seat by the window, the warm light spilling across the table in front of me. For a moment, everything felt still. But that feeling quickly dissipated as my thoughts spun again. Jenna, Trent, the firing, the abruptness of it all. It was like I had been discarded, like I was no longer useful, nothing more than a relic of the past. I pulled out my phone again. My fingers hovered over the screen as I debated what to do. The email from Trent, his request for a meeting about the Riverside project, had been sitting unread in my inbox, and I had ignored all of his calls. I could feel the desperation in those messages, in the way he begged for an urgent conversation. It was almost satisfying. But I had to admit something to myself. I wasn't just angry. I was hurt. Hurt that I had spent so much of my life dedicating myself to a company, to a job that had ultimately seen me as disposable. I had been loyal, committed, and they had tossed me aside without a second thought. I leaned back in my chair, letting my mind wander back to the time I had spent building relationships in this industry. The years of networking, the late nights spent poring over zoning laws and building codes, the partnerships I had cultivated with city officials. I had built a reputation, a solid foundation for success. And now they wanted to erase all of it? I looked down at my phone again. It buzzed, another message from Kath. Mom, please don't do anything crazy, don't make any decisions in the heat of the moment. I smiled faintly, grateful for her concern. But her words also made something inside me click. I wasn't about to do anything crazy. What I was going to do was calculated, precise. I opened a new email and typed quickly, my fingers flying over the keys as the words came to me, clear and sharp. I wasn't going to let this go. I wasn't going to roll over and accept this, not when I had something they needed. The Riverside permits. I hit send. The next morning, I felt strangely calm as I sat at my kitchen table sipping my tea. The decision had been made, and now I could let the pieces fall where they may. What they didn't know, what Trent didn't understand, was that I held the cards now, and I wasn't about to fold. The morning after I sent that email, I sat at my kitchen table, the warmth of my tea a stark contrast to the icy resolve building within me. The sun was bright outside, casting a gentle glow across the countertop, but I hardly noticed. The weight of what I had set in motion was starting to settle in, but so was something else, a sense of control I hadn't felt in days. As the clock ticked away, I checked my phone again. Still no response from Trent. I wasn't surprised. He was probably too busy scrambling to find some way around the mess I had left behind. It was almost amusing in a way. He thought he could just replace me with Jenna, this inexperienced intern, and everything would go smoothly. But he hadn't considered one crucial detail. I had the keys to the entire project. Without me, they were nothing. I thought about Jenna. Poor thing. She had no idea what she had gotten herself into. She probably thought this was all just a game, a stepping stone to something bigger, a way to make a name for herself in the development world. What she didn't know was how much she was about to stumble, how much the reality of navigating city permits and zoning laws was going to crush her. I had done my best to teach her, but I knew that without me, she would flounder. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Victoria, my friend and lawyer. Her words were direct, as always. I reviewed the documents you sent me. It's clear, Everline has no claim over your consulting work. You're in a strong position. We need to decide how to move forward. I smiled, a little proud of myself for thinking ahead. Victoria was right. My consulting company wasn't just some side hustle, it was an entirely separate entity, and Everline had known that when they hired me. They thought they could bypass me? Fine, but they hadn't reckoned with my expertise, and they certainly hadn't planned on me using that expertise to turn the tables. I set my phone down and took another sip of my tea. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about getting back at Trent or Jenna. This was about making them see what they had thrown away. I had spent decades cultivating relationships, building trust, and establishing a reputation that was hard-earned, and Everline thought they could just sweep all of that away because some intern with a flashy social media presence was the future. The thought was laughable. I had no intention of rushing into anything. I wasn't acting out of anger anymore. This was business. Cold, calculated business. If Trent and Everline wanted to play hardball, they would learn that I was no amateur. But before I could move forward, I needed to secure a few things. I opened the folder on my laptop that contained everything related to the Riverside development. There it was, the documentation of the entire permitting process I had orchestrated. I could see it all laid out before me. The preliminary approvals, the zoning applications, the contacts with city officials. Everything filed through my consulting company, Smith Regulatory Consulting. Without my signature, nothing could proceed. Trent had no idea what he was up against. The phone rang. I glanced at the screen. It was Harold from the city planning office. "Becky, thank goodness," he said as soon as I picked up, his voice urgent but not panicked. "We've got a situation. Riverside's final approvals were submitted, but everything's in your name. Everline can't move forward without your signature." I felt a small thrill at his words, so they were already feeling the pressure. "Good. Harold," I said calmly, "I'm aware of the situation, and as I'm no longer employed by Everline, my consulting company is now the official point of contact for those permits. Without my approval, they can't proceed." There was a pause on the other end. "I see. Well, this puts us in a tight spot. Everline's been insistent on bypassing you, But that's not possible under the agreements we've made. We can't proceed without your signature. This could delay the project for months. I let the silence hang for a moment, savoring the weight of his words. I wasn't just in a position of power, I was the one holding everything together. Well, Harold, I said, my voice firm, if Everline wants to move forward with Riverside, they'll have to negotiate with me. It's that simple. Harold sighed. I'll talk to them. I don't think they understand the implications of this. You've put us all in a difficult position, but I'm glad you're clear on where you stand. We'll figure something out. After the call ended, I sat back in my chair, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and calm. The ball was officially in my court, and it was time to make them sweat. The phone buzzed again. This time it was a voicemail from Trent. His voice was strained, tight. Becky, look, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Can we talk? Please, this is urgent. We need you to sign off on the permits. Call me back as soon as possible. I listened to the message a few more times, enjoying the desperation in his voice. He hadn't realized it yet, but everything was slipping through his fingers. I set my phone down and leaned back in my chair, letting the quiet settle around me. This was just the beginning. If they thought they could fire me and walk away without consequence, they were sorely mistaken. I had already made my next move. Now I just had to wait for them to come to me. Monday morning arrived with a sense of calm I hadn't expected. The house was quiet, the sun streaming through the windows, casting soft beams of light on the furniture as I moved through my routine. I had made my decision, and now all I had to do was wait. The phone was silent for the moment, and for the first time in days, I felt a strange peace settle in. That peace was quickly broken by the ringing of my phone. It was Harold from the city planning office again. Becky, we need to talk, he said, his voice laced with urgency. Everline has submitted a request for the final approval of the Riverside project, but we're at an impasse. They're insisting that we proceed without your signature, but that's not possible. Can you meet with me? My heart quickened slightly, but I kept my voice steady. I'm aware of the situation, Harold. I can't just sign off on something that doesn't reflect the truth of the work I've done. Without my signature, nothing will move forward. I could almost hear him running his hands through his hair on the other end. I get that, Becky, but they're pressing hard, and I'm caught in the middle here. This project is a big deal, and there's a lot at stake. I could hear the stress in his voice, but it wasn't my problem. It was Everline's. And they had made their bed. Now they had to lie in it. I understand, Harold, but they need to understand this isn't something that can be bypassed or swept under the rug. The process I've set up has been efficient and reliable for a reason. If they want to proceed, they'll need to talk to me. There was a long pause before he spoke again. I'll let them know. We'll see what they do. I ended the call, a small feeling of satisfaction creeping in. I had made my stance clear. Now it was their move. Not 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from Trent. The subject line was urgent, request for immediate meeting, Riverside Development. I clicked open the message with a small, almost amused smile. Becky, I think there's been some confusion. We need you to help us finalize the Riverside permits. Please let me know when we can meet to discuss this urgent matter. Your prompt attention is crucial. We can't move forward without your approval, and we're hoping to work this out amicably. I couldn't help but let out a soft laugh. Amicably? After the way they had treated me? After the dismissal, the disrespect? There was no amicable about this. They were desperate, and it felt good to know they finally realized the full weight of their mistake. I responded calmly but firmly. I'm available to meet, but only if we discuss the full terms of my involvement. I've already outlined the conditions for moving forward, and I expect them to be honored. If you want to proceed with Riverside, we need to talk about the consulting fee and the recognition of my work in the project documentation. I hit send without a second thought. I wasn't going to back down. They had burned the bridge, and now they had to come to me for help. Less than an hour later, my phone rang again. This time it was Jackson Warren, the principal investor in the Riverside development. His name on the screen made my pulse spike, but I remained calm as I answered. Becky, I'm glad I finally caught you. His voice was smooth, businesslike. I've been hearing a lot about this situation, and I want to make sure we handle it properly. This project is far too important for any delays. Trent seems to think this is just a paperwork issue, but I'm starting to understand that there's much more to it. We need to talk." I felt a surge of recognition for what this meant. Jackson Warren was a major player in Omaha's development scene, and for him to reach out directly meant I had their full attention now. The tides had officially turned. "Jackson," I said, keeping my tone neutral, "I'm more than happy to talk, but let's be clear here. Everline doesn't understand the gravity of what they've done. This isn't just about a few signatures. It's about the years of work and relationships I've built to make sure the Riverside project and all other developments go smoothly." He was quiet for a moment, and I could hear the sound of papers rustling in the background. "I understand," he said finally. "And frankly, from what I've been hearing, Everline has mismanaged this situation. I'm looking at all the angles and I don't like what I'm seeing. I want to avoid a drawn-out fight. How do you think we should proceed?" I took a deep breath, allowing myself a brief moment of satisfaction. "I'm willing to help get Riverside back on track, Jackson. But I won't be doing this for free. I've put years into establishing a process that works, and if they want my expertise, they're going to have to pay for it." "Understood. Let's meet tomorrow," he replied. "I'll bring my team, and we'll work this out." I ended the call and sat back in my chair, the weight of the moment settling in. I had made my choice. This wasn't just about sticking it to Trent or Jenna. This was about showing the industry that experience and expertise couldn't be ignored, no matter how much youth or social media presence someone had. As I looked out the window, the sun still shining brightly in the Omaha sky, I couldn't help but think how much had changed in just a few short days. I had gone from being tossed aside to holding the reins of one of the most lucrative projects in the city. I wasn't just going to be the one who was let go. I was going to be the one who won. Tomorrow would be the real test. And I was ready. Monday morning arrived with a sense of calm I hadn't expected. The house was quiet, the sun streaming through the windows, casting soft beams of light on the furniture as I moved through my routine. I had made my decision, and now all I had to do was wait. The phone was silent for the moment, and for the first time in days, I felt a strange peace settle in. That peace was quickly broken by the ringing of my phone. It was Harold from the city planning office again. "Becky, we need to talk," he said, his voice laced with urgency. "Everline has submitted a request for the final approval of the Riverside project, but we're at an impasse. They're insisting that we proceed without your signature, but that's not possible. Can you meet with me?" My heart quickened slightly, but I kept my voice steady. "I'm aware of the situation, Harold. I can't just sign off on something that doesn't reflect the truth of the work I've done. Without my signature, nothing will move forward." I could almost hear him running his hands through his hair on the other end. "I get that, Becky. But they're pressing hard, and I'm caught in the middle here. This project is a big deal, and there's a lot at stake." I could hear the stress in his voice, but it wasn't my problem. It was Everline's, and they had made their bed, now they had to lie in it. "I understand, Harold, but they need to understand this isn't something that can be bypassed or swept under the rug. The process I've set up has been efficient and reliable for a reason. If they want to proceed, they'll need to talk to me." There was a long pause before he spoke again. "I'll let them know. We'll see what they do." I ended the call, a small feeling of satisfaction creeping in. I had made my stance clear. Now it was their move. Not 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from Trent. The subject line was urgent. "Request for immediate meeting, Riverside Development." I clicked open the message with a small, almost amused smile. "Becky, I think there's been some confusion. We need you to help us finalize the Riverside permits. Please let me know when we can meet to discuss this urgent matter. Your prompt attention is crucial. We can't move forward without your approval, and we're hoping to work this out amicably." I couldn't help but let out a soft laugh. Amicably? After the way they had treated me? After the dismissal, the disrespect? There was no amicable about this. They were desperate, and it felt good to know they finally realized the full weight of their mistake. I responded calmly but firmly, "I'm available to meet, but only if we discuss the full terms of my involvement. I've already outlined the conditions for moving forward, and I expect them to be honored. If you want to proceed with Riverside, we need to talk about the consulting fee and the recognition of my work in the project documentation. I hit send without a second thought. I wasn't going to back down. They had burned the bridge, and now they had to come to me for help. Less than an hour later, my phone rang again. This time it was Jackson Warren, the principal investor in the Riverside development. His name on the screen made my pulse spike, but I remained calm as I answered. "Becky, I'm glad I finally caught you." His voice was smooth, businesslike. "I've been hearing a lot about this situation, and I want to make sure we handle it properly. This project is far too important for any delays. Trent seems to think this is just a paperwork issue, but I'm starting to understand that there's much more to it. We need to talk." I felt a surge of recognition for what this meant. Jackson Warren was a major player in Omaha's development scene, and for him to reach out directly meant I had their full attention now. The tides had officially turned. "Jackson," I said, keeping my tone neutral, "I'm more than happy to talk. But let's be clear here. Everline doesn't understand the gravity of what they've done. This isn't just about a few signatures. It's about the years of work and relationships I've built to make sure the Riverside project and all other developments go smoothly." He was quiet for a moment, and I could hear the sound of papers rustling in the background. "I understand," he said finally. "And frankly, from what I've been hearing, Everline has mismanaged this situation. I'm looking at all the angles, and I don't like what I'm seeing. I want to avoid a drawn-out fight. How do you think we should proceed?" I took a deep breath, allowing myself a brief moment of satisfaction. "I'm willing to help get Riverside back on track, Jackson, but I won't be doing this for free. I've put years into establishing a process that works, and if they want my expertise, they're going to have to pay for it." "Understood. Let's meet tomorrow," he replied. "I'll bring my team, and we'll work this." I ended the call and sat back in my chair, the weight of the moment settling in. I had made my choice. This wasn't just about sticking it to Trent or Jenna. This was about showing the industry that experience and expertise couldn't be ignored, no matter how much youth or social media presence someone had. As I looked out the window, the sun still shining brightly in the Omaha sky, I couldn't help but think how much had changed in just a few short days. I had gone from being tossed aside to holding the reins of one of the most lucrative projects in the city. I wasn't just going to be the one who was let go, I was going to be the one who won. Tomorrow would be the real test. And I was ready. The days following the meeting with Jackson Warren were a blur of contracts, phone calls, and intense preparations. I spent the next several days working closely with Warren Development's team, reviewing the Riverside project's files, and ensuring that everything was in order from a regulatory standpoint. It felt good to be back in my element, directing the course of something important, something real. The power that came from knowing every step of the process, every regulation, every critical detail that could make or break a project. It was something I had cultivated over decades, and now it was mine again. I hadn't heard from Trent or anyone else at Everline since the meeting with Jackson. They were desperate, but I wasn't ready to make things easy for them. The emails, the texts, the increasingly frantic calls, they all went unanswered. It was almost like they were barking up the wrong tree, not even understanding what they were up against. Trent had always thought of me as replaceable, someone who was just there to do the paperwork. But I wasn't just the paperwork, I was the reason the Riverside project was even possible, and they had no idea what kind of mess they were about to be in without me. Then came the first real sign that Everline was starting to panic. It was an email from Trent. This time, the subject line read, "Urgent. Request for a meeting, Riverside Development." I opened it, my finger hovering over the keys. The email itself was a combination of desperation and a thinly veiled attempt at coercion. "Becky, I hope you're doing well. I know things have been difficult, but we need to resolve the situation with the Riverside permits. Please, let's meet and discuss how we can move forward. The project is at a standstill, and the city is putting pressure on us. We need your expertise, and we're prepared to offer you a consulting agreement at a higher rate than what you had before. Let's work together to get this done, Please call me at your earliest convenience. I read the email twice, allowing myself a small smirk. The language was almost humorous, in its attempt to sound like they were doing me a favor. Higher rate, please. They had no idea how much I could have asked for, how much they would have had to pay just to get me back in the game. I wasn't about to give in, not after everything they had put me through. So I let the email sit there unanswered for the rest of the day. The silence was my response. I spent that afternoon walking through the city, letting the fresh air clear my mind. The peace of it, being out of the office, away from the madness, was liberating. It had been so long since I'd had the freedom to just breathe, to be outside and not tethered to a desk, to a phone call, or to some last-minute request from an overzealous boss. Later that evening, as I settled into my kitchen to prepare dinner, my phone buzzed again. It was a voicemail from Trent. "Becky, I can't stress this enough. We need to talk. We're not just facing a delay here. We're facing a real risk of losing the Riverside project altogether. Please call me. This has gone far enough." His voice was strained now, a far cry from the confident tone he'd used when firing me. I couldn't help but enjoy the irony of it. He had thought he could throw me away like a piece of old equipment, and now here he was, pleading for my help. I deleted the voicemail without listening to it a second time. By now, I knew what I had to do. Trent was sweating. Everline was crumbling. They had lost everything when they let me go, and they had no idea how to fix it. The Riverside project was a sinking ship, and they couldn't steer it without me. The next morning my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Catherine. She had been watching the developments closely, always with an eye on the situation. "Mom, I heard through the grapevine that Everline's lost 2 other clients. They're scrambling to keep things together. You're really doing it. You're making them pay for what they did to you." I smiled to myself, the familiar warmth of pride and satisfaction flowing through me. It wasn't just about the money. It wasn't about the contracts or the offers that would come pouring in. It was about the principle, about showing them and everyone that no one was irreplaceable, and that experience, loyalty, and expertise couldn't be bought with a social media following or a shiny new face. But as much as I reveled in the thought of Everline's downfall, I knew I had to be careful. This was a fine line I was walking, a tightrope between taking control of my own future and making sure the damage didn't spread too far. Still, it was hard not to enjoy the small victories. The headlines in the local papers, Everline losing clients left and right, rumors swirling about their inability to manage the permits, the growing whispers in the development community about how the old guard knew what they were doing and how new blood wasn't always as effective as it seemed. At noon, I received an email that confirmed my suspicions. Jackson Warren had made his decision. He had officially pulled the Riverside project from Everline's hands. "Becky, after careful consideration, and due to the ongoing issues with Everline's management of the permits, I have decided to terminate our contract with them for the Riverside development. I have already initiated talks with Hartman and Associates to take over the architectural aspects of the project. We will proceed without Everline's involvement. I look forward to continuing our partnership." I read the email twice, letting the satisfaction settle in. This was it. Everline was out, and I was in, front and center. I leaned back in my chair, taking a deep breath. This was just the beginning, and as I looked out the window, watching the cars pass by and the people going about their day, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The world had underestimated me. They had dismissed me, and now they were paying the price. It was time to make the rest of the world take notice. Time to show them who Becky Smith really was. The news spread quickly. A few hours after Jackson Warren's email, the local business news section was buzzing with headlines. Warren Development cuts ties with Everline, partners with Smith Consulting. The article detailed the decision to pull the Riverside project from Everline's hands and give it directly to Smith Regulatory Consulting, led by yours truly. The piece highlighted my decades of experience, my reputation in the regulatory field, and the very specific knowledge I had of Omaha's zoning laws and building codes. When I saw my name in print, it hit me harder than I expected. The satisfaction of seeing my years of hard work recognized after being so unceremoniously fired and replaced felt sweet, But it also felt like an opening, a new chapter. No longer was I just the woman who kept the wheels turning at Everline. I was now a key player in the future of Omaha's development. By the time the article was published, my phone hadn't stopped ringing. Friends, former colleagues, and even strangers in the development industry were calling, congratulating me on the deal with Jackson Warren. A few of them even asked for my consulting services, eager to work with someone who had managed to outmaneuver one of the city's largest firms. It felt almost surreal. The sense of being in control, of holding the reins, was unlike anything I had experienced in years. I didn't pick up every call. Instead, I focused on the few important ones. The ones that mattered. By the end of the week, I had signed the formal contract with Warren Development, solidifying my role as the regulatory compliance consultant for not just Riverside, but all of their upcoming projects in Omaha. It was a long-term deal, with a comfortable 6-figure salary and performance bonuses based on meeting regulatory milestones. It was more than I had ever earned at Everline, and it was just the beginning. And then came the calls from Everline. At first, I ignored them, the emails, the desperate voicemails from Trent, who, despite his earlier bravado, was now sounding frantic and pleading for my help, were all part of the fallout. They were paying for their rash decision, and I didn't feel sorry for them. But one evening I decided to listen to a voicemail from Trent. His tone was a far cry from what it had been when he fired me. "Becky, please, this has gone too far. We need you to come back. I don't know how to fix this without you. Please, let's talk. I'll make it right, I swear. You can name your price." I couldn't help but feel a bit of vindication. How quickly the tables had turned. Just a few weeks ago, Trent had looked at me like I was dispensable. Now he was begging for my expertise. I thought about calling him back, about saying something biting, something sharp, but I didn't. There was no need. They had made their choice, and I had made mine. I had moved on, and as I sat in my living room that evening, surrounded by my plants in the quiet comfort of my home, I realized something important. I was in control of my own destiny now. No one could take that from me. That weekend, I attended a small gathering with some of the city's top developers and architects. It was a quiet affair, held at one of the new high-rise buildings that had been developed in the city center. As I walked in, heads turned. People I hadn't seen in years were suddenly eager to talk to me, to ask about my work with Jackson Warren, to discuss the possibility of future collaborations. But what struck me most was the way people looked at me now. There was respect in their eyes. The same people who once underestimated me, who had written me off as just a regulatory consultant, were now looking at me as someone with the power to change the game. The conversation shifted when Jackson Warren entered the room. He made a beeline for me, a warm smile on his face. "Becky," he said, shaking my hand, "I've heard nothing but great things. I'm so glad we're working together." His words were sincere, and I appreciated the way he treated me as an equal partner, not just an employee. It was a stark contrast to the way Trent had spoken to me, and it reminded me of why I had made the right choice in working with Jackson. "Thank you, Jackson," with a smile. "I'm excited to be working with you. We're going to make sure Riverside, and every project after that, goes smoothly." And as we spoke about the future of Omaha's development, about the partnerships that could bloom out of our collaboration, I couldn't help but think back to that morning when I had walked out of Everline's office, holding that box of my personal belongings. I had thought it was the end of something. But now, I saw it clearly. It had been the beginning of something far bigger than I had ever imagined. As I stood there, talking with Jackson and the others, I realized that I had finally come into my own. The hurt, the anger, the betrayal, they were all still there, but they no longer defined me. What defined me now was the way I had taken control of my own story, the way I had shown the world and Everline that I was far more than they had ever realized. The old me, the one who had been fired and cast aside, was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who had weathered the storm and come out victorious. And this was just the beginning. A few months later, the Riverside development had broken ground. The city was buzzing with excitement, and my name had become synonymous with success in the regulatory field. Developers knew that if they wanted their projects to succeed, they had to go through me. I was no longer just the person who knew the ins and outs of city permits. I was a key player in shaping the city's future. As I stood on the site during the groundbreaking ceremony, surrounded by city officials and developers, I spotted Trent in the crowd. He looked out of place, uncomfortable among the people he had once considered his peers. Our eyes met briefly, and for a split second, I saw the hint of regret in his gaze. But it was too late for that now. I smiled to myself, knowing that what I had built wasn't just about the contracts or the recognition. It was about proving that experience, expertise, and loyalty still mattered. And that no one, no matter how young, how popular, or how flashy, could ever take that away from me. Sometimes being fired is the best thing that can happen to you. It frees you to become the person you were always meant to be. As the months passed, my consulting business continued to thrive. Word spread quickly throughout Omaha's development community, and the calls for my expertise kept coming. I had become the go-to person for regulatory compliance, and the work was steady, rewarding, and more profitable than I had ever imagined. But more than that, I had reclaimed my sense of purpose, my dignity, and my worth. Sometimes, when I found a quiet moment in the middle of a busy day, I would look out the window of my home office, watching the world go by. It still amazed me how things had changed, how the same city I had worked in for so many years, the same industry that had once seemed so unyielding, had suddenly become full of possibilities. I had finally carved out my place in it, not as a cog in a machine, but as someone whose experience and knowledge were indispensable. I'd often thought about the people who had crossed my path along the way, about Trent and Jenna, about Everline, and about all the other faces who had dismissed me, forgotten my value, or tried to push me aside. They had underestimated me, thought they could erase years of hard work with a few simple words. And maybe at one point they had succeeded in making me feel small. But they hadn't reckoned with the fire inside me, the resilience that had kept me going when all I wanted to do was give up. I had been fired, humiliated, discarded. But in the end, it wasn't just a new chapter that I had begun. It was a complete reinvention of myself. I had learned that nothing was permanent, that even the worst setbacks could be transformed into opportunities. The people who thought I had nothing left to offer had missed the point entirely. I was far from finished. My daughter, Catherine, had been my sounding board throughout all of this. She had always known when to push me, when to encourage me, and when to let me sit back and think. After everything that had happened, she was proud of me, but I knew she was also relieved. She had worried, as any daughter would, about how I would handle being discarded after so many years of loyalty, but she had also watched me rise from the ashes, and I knew she admired the woman I had become. "Mom, you've really done it," she said one afternoon, her voice full of pride and disbelief. "Everline is falling apart, and you're more successful than ever." I smiled at her, knowing there was so much more to the story than she could see. "It's not about them, Catherine. It never was. It's about proving to myself that I'm not done, that I still have something to offer, that age is never a barrier unless you let it be." And as I sat there, reflecting on everything that had happened, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. Grateful for the lessons I had learned, for the relationships I had built, and for the opportunity to prove to myself that no one, not even a corporation or the next shiny new thing, could define who I was. The best part was that, despite everything, I had done it on my own terms. I wasn't someone's employee anymore. I wasn't beholden to anyone's whims or judgments. I was my own boss, and I had built something that was sustainable, that would last long after the transient nature of office politics or corporate restructurings. The truth was, the best thing that had happened to me in years was being fired. And that wasn't just a lesson I had learned. It was a revelation that had reshaped the way I saw the world. My age, my experience, my knowledge, all of it was now my greatest asset. I wasn't a granny anymore. I was an expert, and I was more valuable than ever. As I glanced at the file in front of me, the plans for the next big project I was about to oversee, the weight of everything I had accomplished settled into place. The Riverside development was only the beginning. There were new projects on the horizon, new clients, new challenges that would push me further than I had ever been. And for the first time in a long time, I was excited about the future. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving, and the world would have to recognize. Sometimes, life doesn't give you what you want. Sometimes it gives you what you need: a hard lesson, a tough break, a moment of humiliation, and then the chance to rebuild. For me, that lesson had been one of self-discovery, of realizing that my worth wasn't tied to a company or a title. It was tied to the knowledge I had accumulated over the years, the work I had done, and the relationships I had built. I had thought that getting fired would be the end of me. But instead, it turned out to be the beginning of something far greater. There would be other challenges. I knew that. There would be other hurdles, other people who tried to tell me what I could and couldn't do. But now, I wasn't afraid of any of them. I had already faced the worst and come out stronger. The future was mine to shape, and this time, no one would be able to take that away from me. The world had underestimated me. They had forgotten my value. But now, they would have to reckon with the woman who had learned how to rise, to reinvent herself, and to show that true strength lies in resilience. I was Becky Smith, and I was just getting started.